Good afternoon. Today we're talking to Andy Aceto. Are you pronounce your last name? Aceto?
Adam, Adam
Oh, Adam
Acito.
Aceto. Adam Aceto, who's famous for bringing back early Kern and working on projects with the Comic Opera Guild and with other opera companies, the light operas. So tell us of your beginning and appreciating piano. Where did this happen?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my parents were involved in theater a little bit, and I was always interested in music and played the piano, and so it's sort of a natural fit that I started playing rehearsal piano for shows and in the pits of the musicals that would come to town or in the various community theaters and things like that. So, my parents would listen to musicals on, cast albums and things like that. So I can't really ever think of a time where I wasn't familiar with, the Broadway shows of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, either from my own playing or just from hearing it at home and that sort of thing. So, it's one of those things you sort of grow up with and it sticks with you.
So what shows did you start to play on, and
Um,
what
yeah.
venues were they?
Yeah, I probably played for all of the major high schools in the Milwaukee area at some point or another. Shorewood and Whitefish Bay, all of the various community theater groups. Jewish Community Center had a big theater group. Pam Krieger, who was a big director locally there. I played for a lot of things she did at in all the other little towns. Trying to think the Sound of Music, I must have played 16 times. Into the Woods was very popular when I was in high school, so I played that 3 or 4 different productions. All the big R&H shows, Carousel, I remember fondly.
These were done with full orchestras by and large?
Mostly reduced orchestra, yeah. And as a pianist, I would sort of fill in gaps where if you didn't have a full string complement. So you learn quickly how to read a published vocal score and how to augment it and how to decipher it from the orchestral cues and things like that. But yeah, my own high school did Merrily We Roll Along. I had played Wonderful Town before it had become popular in sort of the 2000s when Simon Rattle had come out with a recording of it. So yeah, pretty varied all in all. But the current things which I was associated with later, I really had no knowledge of until I went to college. So.
And you played for touring shows?
Yeah, occasionally. At the what is now I think the Market Center in Milwaukee. What back then was the PAC, the Performing Arts Center, and touring shows would come to town. I remember when I was 16 years old, Charles Strauss actually came with a show called Lyle Lyle Crocodile. It was sort of a children's show, and the parts or materials had been lost somewhere along the route, and so 3 or 4 kind of orchestrators, copyists, whoever was sort of on hand was called in to help reconstruct this. Charles Strauss would play little melodies and things of everything he remembered along with the script, and we would transcribe it. And because I was involved in all of these things, they actually brought me in. I was terrified and delighted at the same time. Here was this, famous composer who wrote Annie and all of these other things sitting there with a baseball cap. And here I am with my peers who are in their 30s, 40s, and older. And here I am as a little tyke, taking down dictation and putting stuff into the computer program Finale for this, what I'm considering this very famous guy. So, yeah, that's
about what year would this have been?
Probably 96, maybe something like that. Yeah.
And where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Michigan. One of my teachers growing up had gone there, and I highly recommended it. I had gone to the National Music Camp for 2 summers up at Interlochen, so I sort of knew there was a lot of bleed crossover, so to speak, from both Michigan State and University of Michigan in the teaching faculty up at Interlochen. So I sort of was familiar. I was very interested in going to a school that I could do not just music. So I had actually looked into doing some things like Oberlin and some of the East Coast conservatories. But when I asked, can I take a German class just for fun, and they would really sort of shake their head at that sort of thing. I was very interested in foreign language at the time. So Michigan sort of had the best of both worlds. It had a great music school, but also obviously the university is fantastic outside of the music school. So with your music school acceptance, you got to basically take any class at the university that you wanted, which like Cleveland Institute has with Case Western. It's fully integrated. It's not separate. Or Eastman has with the University of Rochester. They're sort of separate entities, but at Michigan they're all one. So yeah, it was a kid in the candy store learning wise, because I could do all the music things I want and then all the language things at the same time. I remember there was one semester I actually was doing I think French, German, and Italian all in a row on the same day. So, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and then I'd go back to the music school. So it was really great for that. But
what areas of music were what kind of music classes?
Yeah, well, I actually had gone. Because I wanted I could take organ lessons without being an organ major, and I had played at church since I was sort of a little kid, not very well, but I had actually taken organ at Interlochen and got kind of interested in it. So I actually graduated as a music theory major, but organ sort of wound up being my instrument. So, but yeah, it was a terrific experience. And again, the programs were all very open. So even if you came there as a pianist, you could take an organ lesson without needing all sorts of red tape or permissions or things like that. My ultimate goal was to do orchestral conducting. And so I started doing master's work after that at Michigan with the orchestral conducting program there. But then I was so sidetracked by actually working for a living doing things that I stopped mid-degree, and yeah, I've been working as a professional musician ever since. So,
who were some of the people? Were you involved with the singers who went there? Who were some of the people who gone on from?
Yeah, there were a lot there at the time, and I played for nearly all of them. As one of the classes, in my degree program, was a piano accompanying, and so as part of your duties as piano accompanying, you had to coach singers for their private lessons. And we had at the time I was there, excuse me, Shirley Verrett, George Shirley, Lorna Haywood. My favorite was Bolcom and Morris, who are still there, I think now retired, but still living in Ann Arbor. Those certainly jump to mind as being sort of, again, these people who I knew from famous albums, or suddenly I'm sitting in their studio while they're coaching someone, hoping I don't make a mistake in the recitatives from the Messiah or something like that. So yeah, it was really the cachet of opera singers, especially that they had then, was really awesome. So,
and when did you learn of the Comic Opera Guild?
Shortly after I got to Michigan. This was back in the day. I mean, we had internet, but there would be these large bulletin boards in the kind of communal areas, and Comic Opera Guild had put up a poster looking for a music director for El Capitan, Sousa's sort of most famous operetta. And it's very rarely produced. And I was surprised that a local company would be doing something so obscure, because in my experience, these companies tended to gravitate towards those old chestnuts of Merry Widow and Fledermaus and things like that. So I piqued my interest, and I sort of auditioned and met with them and talked with them, and basically got the job. And so I was the music director. We had a full orchestra, chorus, a big stage production, which I think was in 2001, I think, maybe something like that. And so they asked me if I was interested in being a board member after that. And their regular, non-for-profit, they'd have monthly meetings. I thought, okay, yeah, this is something I'm interested in supporting. And if they were going to continue doing repertoire that I thought was a little off the beaten path and also worthy of staging and doing, I'm a proponent of that. So it was a good fit. So.
But then you asked them, what about Kern and a little more popular music than the traditional?
Yeah, well, they always had a broad, pretty broad repertoire. I mean, they had done Kismet. But they had also done the Beggar's Opera, from whatever. So there was always some discussion about what the next show or shows for the season would be. And so after a couple of years of that, we'd go through this routine year after year. They would bring out a list of, the top 100 operettas, and we'd sort of look through it. And what bothered me was that there were shows by Kern and Herbert and others that were on this list and were always just sort of dismissed because there weren't any recordings by which you could listen to and judge the quality of the show if it was something you wanted to produce. So this really bothered me. So the whole idea of the Comic Opera Guild doing these more obscure titles and even the more of the musical theater things was because these titles and composers would show up on this 100 most popular operettas, and there were no recordings. So one summer, Patrick Johnson, who was still is a great friend of mine and is a amazingly talented pianist. Pat had played the rehearsal piano for all of the Comic Opera Guild shows that I conducted. So we thought, okay, well, why don't we do 2 piano reductions of the orchestral scores, and we'll just get a group of singers together and basically sing through these shows. So we put together one summer, we were going to do 6 Victor Herbert and 6 Kern. And so over a month, we'd have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every week, every weekend, 3 different shows. And it was really taxing, but when you're 24 years old, you can do anything, and you have the chutzpah to pull it off, and that's what we did. And Tom Petit, who is the longtime managing director of Comic Opera Guild and the founder of Comic Opera Guild, always had the habit of recording. Even since their inception in the 1970s, he recorded reel-to-reel tapes of nearly every production that they did. So he recorded these Kern and Herberts, and we never, ever, and we've gotten, as an aside, we've gotten in a bit of trouble over it over the years now, because what happened was we had such an outpouring of interest. We would get dozens of letters, some including just cash, saying, can I please have a recording of the fill in the blank, the Red Mill, or the Sweethearts that you recorded, or the Princess Pat, or Oh Boy, or Oh Lady Lady. And so suddenly there was this demand for these recordings. Well, these weren't done in a studio. These weren't even barely done with any intention of recording whatsoever. There was maybe 1 or 2 microphones put at the edge of a stage, and that was it. So now, some 15 years later, I know there have been some complaints over the years by some people who've bought these recordings, saying that the sound quality is very bad and they're not mic'd right, and all of that is absolutely true. But the point of fact is that they were never intended to be commercial recordings in the first place, and all they were meant to do was to be sort of serve as in-house demos, if you will, for our Comic Opera Guild board, so that they could listen to these scores and judge for themselves if they were worth putting back up on stage. And as we've learned now, since those recordings have come out, Comic Opera Guild, among many other companies across the country, have now taken upon themselves to stage productions of many of the shows that we recorded in that sort of effort to do just that, to bring what is otherwise just a score on the shelf to life, so that someone who's not a trained musician can pop the CD in and hear the score once and for all. And to that, and we try to always be very faithful to it, not to really jazzify it or change it or make cuts or add extra songs from extra shows, and just let the show stand on its own merits, and so it can be judged in that same way.
But you would sometimes perform songs that had been cut from the shows prior to Broadway. Yeah,
I was very inspired, even in my earliest days, by the late John McGlynn. I just always found his musicological research and his recordings just so inspiring. I love that period sound and wanted to do everything authentically, just the way he had. And so, yeah, after we realized there was an interest to do this, after that first year, which I think was 2005 maybe, I realized that maybe we needed to do this a little bit more carefully. So what we had been doing was just going to the library and pulling a score off the shelf, copying it, giving it to the singers, and having a rehearsal or two and recording. That's it. So then after that, we decided, okay, well, maybe we need to, if we're actually going to sell these, we maybe need to do a little bit more due diligence, trying to make the score as complete as possible, finding the original scripts, because oftentimes they're missing lyrics or verses and things like that. And so, yeah, so as it developed, our recording got better. I think the playing and singing got better, and then also the scores got more and more complete. So that in some cases, yeah, you'll have as much as a half a CD of just extraneous and cut material, not to mention the actual cast album from overture to exit music. So some of them, there are 2 CDs. Yeah, 2 CDs, and in some cases, I think there is even a 3 CD or 2 in the mix there. And on some shows too, you can have a choice of with dialogue or without dialogue. Yeah, I think Tom has been very good about that. I mean, some people like to hear the dialogue. In most cases, we used original scripts where possible, and Tom, who is a very handy playwright, would adapt or change or make tighten it up a little bit, but basically keep the same story. But for anyone who likes a cast album, you don't need all the dialogue. You get a sense of the story maybe from the synopsis and just want to hear the music. So yeah, everything I think is still available in what he calls music only, which is usually the whole show, and then any bonus or cut songs are usually at the end as bonus tracks. So about how many current shows would you say there are? How many current shows have we recorded, or how many current shows are there in total? Well, you know both. I'd be interested in both. Well, I think there are about 40 current shows in total, beginning in his early days. London, including a few London shows? London, and then of course, his last show in 1939, which is Very Warm for May, which includes that famous ballad, All the Things You Are. And but I think Comic Opera Guild has done 14 or 18 Kerns, I think now, starting in 1915. I think that's the earliest, with Very Good Eddie, which was again, we used all the original materials we could get our hands on. So Very Good Eddie, there was a Broadway revival in the 70s, and they made an LP of that. But it includes songs from other current musicals as interpolations. So ours is completely original to the 1915. And then I think the last latest of the Kerns that we recorded was The Cat and the Fiddle, which is from 1931, which we were very kind enough to get special permission from Tams Whitmark and from the other copyright owners to actually put out a small release of a show from the 30s, which is still under copyright. So, yeah, that's just a magnificent score. Unfortunately, the two pianos really just don't do it justice, although we tried to do the best we can. But you can at least still hear it's 2 CDs of almost thoroughly integrated dialogue and music and dance. It's really quite an amazing score. So,
as Footlight Records, I've been selling
yeah,
all these recordings, I think, from pretty much the beginning, and so
yeah,
somebody can either go to the Comic Opera Guild or to the Footlight site to find these. And
yeah.
to tell us again about Victor Herbert again, how many he wrote? Do you have any idea he wrote?
Yeah, well,
than...
Victor Herbert, I mean, it's almost 50 operettas, I mean, complete ones, and we're very close. I don't have the facts and figures in front of me. I think we've recorded almost 40, if I'm not mistaken, of Victor Herbert alone. I think there are only 6 operettas that that were completed and performed that we have not yet recorded. But even this summer, I still have a relationship with the Comic Opera Guild, and excuse me, 2 years ago I was back in Michigan, and we recorded 2 more of Victor Herbert's, The Girl in the Spotlight and My Golden Girl, both from 1920, which were more of his attempts at musicals. You know, again, this is the era that Kern is in his heyday, and Gershwin is in his early years of writing, and here's Victor Herbert, who we think of sort of as this operetta dinosaur from the 1890s, trying his hand at foxtrots and tangos and all of that. So that was fun to record. And we were planning again this year to spend the summer to record 2 more Victor Herbert operettas, but because of the COVID situation, just wasn't feasible. So hopefully next year there'll be 2 more to the mix, and only being 6 shows away, and I think it is possible that we will finish and record all of the Victor Herbert operettas, and it's maybe at that time then we can go back to the beginning and do them all with orchestra. So.
And how did you get involved with Operetta Archives? Yeah,
well, Mike Miller has become a very great friend. Both Mike and Ann were early supporters of what the Comic Opera Guild was doing. They were supporters of everyone who was doing anything with operettas or early musicals, and they are regular fixtures at the Ohio Light Opera, which is based in Worcester, Ohio, which is only about 3 hours from Ann Arbor, where Comic Opera Guild's sort of center of operations is. So each year when we would do these live performances, they would take a day or 2 and drive up to Michigan and come and see these shows, and then drive back and see the next set of shows over at Worcester. But yeah, even from the earliest days, before I even met Mike in person, he was a great resource for sheet music, obscure commercial recordings, even cast albums and things that were recorded, on someone's secret, pocket microphone or something like that, and he'd have these recordings that were just unable to find anywhere else, and he was always supportive of us doing that. As a matter of fact, I now live in Los Angeles and work with Mike on a number of projects over the last 10 years here locally. But actually, before I left Ann Arbor, our largest production to date there at the time was Victor Herbert's 1898 operetta, The Fortune Teller, the Gypsy Love Song, and the famous Chardash come from that. And that was with about 60 in the chorus, a full orchestra, and all completely restored, all the entire score, and the first time that had ever been recorded. And actually, that Mike actually decided to produce that. So that is a Comic Opera Guild production, but an Operetta Archives archives release. So that's sort of the crossover, if you will, from one to the other. So
when did Ohio Light Opera start?
I think they've been in business about as long as Comic Opera Guild. I think in the early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. So and they were primarily in the early days a Gilbert and Sullivan society, and that's actually part of the reason Comic Opera Guild exists, is because there is in Ann Arbor a Gilbert and Sullivan society, which has roots, I think, dating back to the 50s and maybe even earlier. So Comic Opera Guild was founded basically on the principle of non-GNS operettas. And that's why I think there's always been a little bit more curiosity and interest in doing things a little off the beaten path. So, and to that end, Ohio Light Opera has done considerably broader and broader repertoire too since their early days. They're even doing musicals now from the 50s, Music Man, and other things along that, Anything Goes and things like that. But yeah, Ohio Light Opera too has been one of the companies that has embraced some of the shows that Comic Opera Guild brought to light using these recordings. So they have very recently did Kern's Have a Heart, a fully staged production with orchestra, which was just beautiful. The Cabaret Girl, again, a current show that Comic Opera Guild released 2 discs of music for, that then Ohio some years later put on as a full production. And I don't see any, sometimes people ask me, oh, what do you think of the competition kind of thing? I don't view it that way at all. I'm so glad that we could, having other companies produce these shows in full-scale productions was exactly the point of why we made these recordings in the first place, because I didn't want them sitting on a shelf and just being a line item on a list of 100 operettas. They really need to be heard, to be appreciated. And if what we did can do that and bring them to light in people's ear, and they are so inspired as to do a full production with costumes and orchestra and lights and all that, that's wonderful. Then we've succeeded. So I'm really proud of that.
I just interviewed Tom, and at the end, I said, is there anything you would like to add? He said, I want people to know that a lot of this material is available for people around the country, around the world even, so that you can get a reduced script, because some of these old shows were just too long and had too many sort of corny period
too many
jokes.
old corny jokes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it often takes some digging. I mean, it's not like you can just walk into your local library and say, hand me the score for some of these rarer shows. But especially in the case of Herbert, especially, and some of his contemporaries, De Koven, Karl Hoschna, most of their shows were published. So just through interlibrary loan, you can get your hand on I would say 80% of the scores of Victor Herbert. Probably, I don't know, 40% of the Kern shows were published. Romberg, not so much, but the famous ones, yes. And Frimmel too, even some of his early shows like Sometime, the more famous one, Rosemarie, Firefly, all published. So it's not like you have to get special permission and go to the Library of Congress or go to the New York Public Library, which for some of these very obscure things are really necessary in order to get a hold of them. But yeah, if people are curious about knowing more about the score or putting on their own productions, they're not that difficult to find. So
when did the Operetta Archives start recording?
My first involvement with Operetta Archives was in 2007. Pat Johnson and I were hired as the 2 pianists for a concert production of Emmerich Kálmán, the Hungarian composer's operetta Marinka, which was actually written for Broadway in 1945. And Mike is absolutely the end-all, be-all authority of Emmerich Kálmán in the United States and maybe the world. And he was very curious to get the score, which had never been recorded heard, and so he arranged a production with top-notch singers, a fantastic director from Eastman, Steve Daigle, who works at who runs is artistic director at Ohio Light Opera as well, and me and Pat were the orchestra, so to speak, because the orchestra parts were lost. So we took what scraps of the vocal score were there and tried to orchestrate it as best we could. And so yeah, we flew out to Los Angeles and did this production and made a recording of Marinka, and yeah, it was very well received, I think, but I think it was Mike's first attempt at a the recording of a full show cover to cover. Prior to that, he had been releasing some radio performances and some kind of pastiches of selections of songs, Tin Pan Alley, early Broadway, early operetta kind of collections. But I think that Marinka, I might be mistaken, but I think that Marinka that we did together was his first at a complete score cover to cover. And since then, we've done a number more together. We've done music of Louis Hirsch, two shows. He came from Milwaukee, an early 1912 show, and My Hometown Girl, Going Up, which was a famous show in 1917 by Louis Hirsch, and some other things as well. So he's really branched out and is doing more. But I think, yeah, maybe the first recording is from the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the first two discs Operetta Archives put out were Kalman tributes, both with Kalman conducting and other Kalman music. So.
Did he just do something on Kalman Chicago?
Yeah, Kalman is done still around the world. It's amazing how many productions there are. Kalman's youngest daughter, Yvonne, is still alive and goes around the world championing his works. And she actually was at our production of Marinka, so that was a real honor to be able to play Marinka for her with her stamp of approval on it too. So,
what do you know of? I'm good friends with Steve Ross, who's been doing cabaret for 40 or 50 years, and he does tributes to all the great, Bernard Lowe and Rodgers and Hart, and
there are quite a handful of people out there who are bringing to life these older songs and older scores, and bringing it to a new audience, and I think that's great. I really come at it from a completeness and from the sense of wanting to keep as much of the composer's original sound or intention alive as possible. That's sort of my unique angle on these things. I know a number of other people who like this repertoire kind of put their own spin on it. Not that there's anything wrong in doing that, but I guess since I kind of came from the classical world, I still approach these not necessarily with a classical sound, but in a sort of allowing the printed page to dictate what I do versus pushing my arrangements or my own characteristics onto the page. So,
but he told me that he had, but he couldn't put his hands on it right away, songs that Kalman had written with Lawrence Hart.
Yeah.
What do you know of that project?
Yeah, the Miss Underground is the name of that show. Yeah, they had worked together. There are some existing lyrics, I believe. Mike is the ultimate authority, and I'd hate to speak out of turn or give any misinformation, but I do know that some of the Hart lyrics still exist for that. I'm not 100% sure that Kalman actually wrote a unique score, but from my own experience during Marinka, which had lyrics by George Marion Jr., Kalman actually took songs from former German operettas or German language operettas that he had written, and then merely had new lyrics added to those melodies. So I can't speak to Miss Underground whether that's actually a uniquely American score or whether, again, like for Marinka, he took existing songs and had Larry Hart add new lyrics to existing melodies. So
would this be like 1942, 43 that
I
this would have
think
happened?
somewhere, yeah, I think somewhere around there. There's another. I'm just trying to think. There was another. There. P.G. Woodhouse did a Kalman show in the early, I think 20 or there around, called The Riviera Girl, and that was published in sheet music, but had again is a almost complete Kalman score from Vienna, which I think is the Czardas-Fürsten, and has new English lyrics just basically written over it, but it's the same story and the same music. So, yeah.
Are there any recordings of the Woodhouse?
I'm not, Mel Miller, I know was planning to do a production with his company, but I don't know if that actually came to life or not. So I think on some of Mike's previous albums, he has recorded some of those songs, but to the best of my knowledge, it wasn't recorded in its completeness. There was a moment in time too, I believe the Budapest Operetta Theater, which is really a tremendous company, was going to produce that in English in Hungary. But I'm not sure that, I remember actually helping Mike prepare some music for that, and but I don't remember whether that production came to be or not. The Ohio Light Opera, though, to mention them again, they have been on a string of Kalman productions over the last 10 or 15 years. It wouldn't surprise me if the Riviera Girl were produced there too sometime in the near future when things get back to normal. So.
And people come from around the world to the Ohio Light Opera, right? They arrange it so that you can.
The amazing part about Ohio Light Opera is it's a repertoire company, so they have a 6, 7, 8 shows that are done in on a rotation. But the last week, which is I think the first or second week of August, usually the last week of the season, all 7 shows play in a span of 4 days. So there's an afternoon and evening production, I think, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So if you come for just the span of a week, you can see 7 or 8 complete shows with orchestra, with everything, in the span of 4 days. And for people who for anyone who likes musicals, but especially if you're curious about these lesser known titles, which they've started to include a bit more and more, it's a great way to take in a lot of theater in a short span of time. So yeah, highly recommend it.
How many of these festivals have you attended?
I have gone to Ohio. Well, I've probably visited, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 seasons worth. Now that I live in Los Angeles, it's much more difficult than when I lived in Detroit. But I've helped them with productions. I would say nearly every year I've been involved with Mike. So I'd say, the last 10 years at the very least. They produced the Fortune Teller, which I restored. I helped I found the materials for the Cabaret Girl, the Kern, which they did. Their last season, I believe, they did Gershwin's Primrose, which is a London show. And I did some of the copywork restoration for them on that. So although I'm not affiliated with the company formally, I've been very happy that they've been kind enough to ask me to help when it comes to the care and restoration of some of these early musicals and operettas that have been involved with COG. So.
And currently, you're playing a lot of church.
Yeah, that's my my day job, so to speak. I'm the music director of a fairly large Catholic church in Burbank, California, and up until recently, had quite a large music program and many services to play. And but the COVID situation has certainly thrown a monkey wrench in the churches just as it has the theaters. So we're just trying to make the best of it. As a matter of fact, I also play organ for the Arlington Theater in Santa Barbara, which is not early 30s movie palace, and has a large theater organ. So I've been working on a new recording for them, actually, that Mike is going to put out of movie music from the 20s and 30s that we recorded on the organ, since I've had a little less bench time at the church these days playing for services. So I've still been getting my organ quota in, and yeah, looking forward to getting that album out too.
Because in movies, tell people how silent movies had music.
Yeah, well, the silent movie, I mean, that we might need our own a separate show just for that. But yeah, I was always interested in silent movies, and so much of the music that you hear, especially on the more modern recordings that try to use period soundtracks, little do you know that very often they're using songs that come from these early shows. So it's funny when I listen to the recordings, whether it's Gaylord Carter or Dennis James playing these scores, I must be the only one person in the world who's singing along, because I know the lyrics to these obscure Kern and Hirsch and Hoshna and Silvio Hine and all these other early American composers whose music they're using because it has that period flavor which accompanies movies so well. But yeah, I think there's a misconception that while there were cue sheets that were put out as sort of a guide for musicians in the theaters in the teens and 20s to accompany these movies, that there's still quite an art form into tailoring music to fit these scenes, whether that's with orchestra, whether that's with piano or on the organ. And it does take quite a bit of research, I think, to do it well. I mean, there are some people I know who can just sit down and they play, and it's fine. But I like the score to really be as integrated and smart as it can be. If there are bubbles on the screen, you really should be playing "I Forever Blowing Bubbles." That kind of interplay between the music and the action that's going on. So yeah, that takes some digging and knowledge of music of the time, rather than just improvising anything, which while passable, I think what really separates the good movie accompaniments from the great ones is that integration. So
what year did just piano playing start for silent movies?
Well, I mean, it all sort of happened together. I mean, I guess the very first films were probably with piano, because theaters had pianos as part of the orchestra very often. But the advent of the theater organ was almost simultaneous with the films too. So the theater organ production of the teens, granted, it's dwarfed by the huge numbers of manufacture in the 20s, but organs for theaters were still coming out in the teens, and contrary to most thinking, while an organ is a big expense, it's not as expensive as paying a full pit orchestra worth of musicians on scale for 7 productions a day, 6 days a week. So while they were paying live musicians hand over fist small amounts over a long period of time, they could outlay quite a bit of money up front for an organ and just pay one musician. So and kind of get the same orchestral effect, if you will.
But a theater organ was actually made. There was the conventional organ did not have as many keys. What's the difference between a church organ and a theater organ?
Yeah, the church organ, and I mean the mechanisms are the same between them. How the actual individual pipes sound, how they're accessed by the player is different, and then how they're used in combination is also different. So from the standpoint of pulling a stop and pressing a key, that's universal for all organs. But yeah, how the theater organ pipes sound and their volume and their wind pressure and how they're used in conjunction with other stops and how those are laid out on the actual organ console is much different than a theater organ. But from the average person's listening, you obviously can tell the difference, but how the sound is produced, air going through a pipe, is the same. So.
How long did it take you to really feel you had mastered the theater organ?
I've not mastered the theater organ. I think that, like all musicians, it's a lifetime is not long enough to get there. But actually, I was thrown in the deep end and just told to swim. My claim to fame, as it were, in Santa Barbara was that they had a organist booked in. I was a member of the club in Santa Barbara, but nothing more. And I would come up and play from time to time, but I had never done a movie for them. Although I actually had done a few silent movies at the Old Town Music Hall, where the late Bill Field sort of ran a small movie venue down in El Segundo, California, and he would show silent movies. When he got sick, I was one of the organists who came in to help. But that's neither here nor there. In Santa Barbara, though, that's really my big break. The organist they had scheduled for this movie was coming in from the East Coast in October, and there was an early nor'easter snowstorm, and he couldn't come in. And I got a call. This was on a Sunday. I got a call on a Sunday morning at about 10 o'clock. I was between services, panicked, from one of the members of the organ club saying, the organist can't come. Can you be here in Santa Barbara in 4 hours and play this silent movie that I've never seen or heard? And so I called one of my substitutes locally and said, can you cover the rest of my day here at the church? I got to go like right this second. It's about a 2-hour drive to Santa Barbara. So hopped in the car and drove to Santa Barbara, and this was a big event. Thousands of people had paid to see the Nosferatu, and this was all Halloween themed and everything. So I had walked in, and the producers and the theater management, they were sweating bullets, and they showed me I guess it was the back of the DVD, which has a little summary of what the movie is about. And so I kind of read that, and they're like, can you do this? Or how are you going to do it? I was like, this won't be my greatest, speaking of those integrated productions. But I said, I think I could, it's horror. It's sort of a little avant-garde. The story's not quite if the music's eerie enough, I think I could do it. So yeah, I sat down and accompanied blind Nosferatu, which is, again, a sort of strange movie to begin with, even on a good day. Everyone was very impressed, because I've done every silent movie for Santa Barbara Film Festival since. So there was, I guess I proved my worth, but it was, I guess it wasn't as scary as at the moment, but in retrospect, I maybe should, I guess that's what ignorance shows. You're able to do it, but yeah, it was quite.
What are some other Santa Barbara films you've done?
Yeah, well, we've done a lot. Robin Hood, Thief of Baghdad, Wings. Let's see, we've done some Chaplains. We did Gold Rush. Yeah, quite a few. We've done, I think, I don't know, 12 or 15 maybe in the last 8 years. So yeah, they're really good proponents of it, and it's been wonderful to play for them. The theater's amazing, the organ's great too, but just to have such appreciation from these filmophiles who come up for the festival from around the country, it's wonderful to play for an audience that's so appreciative.
What is your approach to it now that you know what you're playing? What is the
typical?
What is your procedure?
I do a lot of homework. I mean, I always watch the movie without the sound. I think it's too easy to be influenced by someone else's soundtrack. So it's very boring hour or two, but I just put the movie on. No, I have a little notepad, and I just watch the movie with no music, no anything, and I just jot down little notes. So, Chaplin sits on bench. Chaplin gets hit with a snowball. Door opens, and I have a page of notes by the end of the movie of actions and sort of where they lie out in scenes. And then I start to go through my own music library, finding music that's appropriate for it. So oftentimes there was movie music that came out around the time of the film. Sometimes it was used in the film, sometimes not. But then I'm just using the theme of what the movie is to try and find music that suits it. I also find that trying to find themes that are easily varied is important. So rather than having a theme for every mood, a sad theme, a happy theme, a melancholy theme, if I can have one theme that I can change a note here or a note there so that it's the same melody, but maybe now it's in minor, or maybe now the tune is upside down rather than right side up, things like that. So I guess the only other thing I do consciously is I try not to use music that came after the movie was released. So I try to stick with, if the movie came out, Gold Rush came out in 1925, I try to limit myself to music that came 1925 or before. I don't know whether that makes any difference or not, but I'm just trying to put myself in the head of the creators. That's the only music they knew. Music that came after the film, they didn't know that yet. So, so I use that as sort of a guide. What pieces to pull from. So
what was the most difficult one for you to do?
Well, any of them that go on. Wings comes to mind. That they're flying for the last 20-25 minutes of the film, which is wonderful visual effects. But from a musical standpoint, there's nobody getting hit with a snowball. There's no door opening. It's just guys flying around in planes. So now I have to play airplane music that is not tiring on the ear for 25 minutes. And if you have a theme that's small, 16 bars, that covers about 20 seconds. So from that 20-second little germ, I have to freely compose 20 minutes worth of really worthwhile music someone wants to listen to, not just silly chords or arpeggios going up and down. So I find that that's the biggest challenge. Also, just my own personal fatigue. There was one season we actually played 2 silents back to back, and both movies were I forget what. Maybe it was Robin Hood and Thief of Baghdad at the same. So there was one show at 3. This movie was just under 3 hours long. There was like an hour break, and then we showed the next one. So I played the intermission between the show. So I was sitting on that bench literally for 7 hours playing from beginning to end with almost no break. And as a musician, you want to care about the last scene and the last chord as much as you did about the first scene and the when you had where you were fully concentrated. So I find that that's the hardest part. The playing is really is not a challenge, but mentally to care about that last scene rather than just throwing in the towel like, oh gosh, I've been playing for 7 hours. They don't need any good music here. I'll just play this schlock and they'll be happy, So to really invest yourself to the very end, especially on long days like that, I find that's really the most difficult part.
Do they have a reception where you are praised for what you've done?
Yeah, the biggest praise for me is the fact that they continue on such an Santa Barbara, for at least for such a what's the right word, for an event that is so highly regarded, across the world, that they invite me back again and again, and so warmly, that's the biggest compliment I can have. Every year I always do a little talk back at the end of the show where I bring the organ down to the stage level and people can come and ask questions. And yeah, it's just one more way, like the Kern and like the Herbert, to bring this older music, which is still, you know, in all senses, very good music. It's just not heard. And if you can bring it to life for people in a musical way, it still inspires people and excites people. They're curious about it. So every year, hundreds of people come to the front of the stage and ask questions and want to know about the organ and want to know about the music and all that. That couldn't make me happier. That's worth the sitting there for 8 hours on a hard wooden bench. That makes it all worthwhile for me. So.
But are there events like this going on in Europe and other places?
The number of theater organs in Europe is smaller, although there are a number of almost full-time orchestras in Germany, especially, that do silent movies with orchestral scores. Yeah, there's still quite a bit of interest, and there are other theater organists beside myself who kind of do the circuit and go around the country playing at various events. It's not a lot; it's maybe a dozen or 20 organists, but there's still a handful of people who are doing this and are interested. Likewise, there are a number of collectors who collect music associated with silent films, be it orchestral materials or cue sheets or script material, anything like that. So yeah, there's quite a bit of interest. But like the operettas, there are many of these titles which are thrown around, both musically and the films themselves, which don't get a lot of airtime or a lot of screen time. So there's still a lot of work to be done for us to bring all of this music in a way that people can hear it in a digital age. So,
have you ever done Metropolis?
I did do Metropolis. There's a wonderful score that was written in the period, Huppert's, and published in Germany. It's about 200 pages. It's packed piano score. The version we used, though, was the one that had been put together in the 80s. And that score that was published didn't fit it very well. Also, I think that score really needs orchestra in order to sell it. But the one from the 80s, and I forget his name, it was published by, or put together by, this famous producer who did these rock albums. And so it has a score that had all...
Like disco?
Rock musicians. Yeah. Anyway, my interest in popular music dwindles after about 1970, so I don't really know much about that. Anyway, I thought, well, there was no way I could go to the movie theater and listen to that score with that version of the film. So what I did was I made a period score that matched that cut, so that you could see the 80s cut of it, which is less common to see than the one with the Huppert score, but put a period score rather than the rock score. So, but yeah, that's a fascinating one to see. And actually, if I remember correctly, I used some Kallmann music in that too, because that was very popular in the time that Kallmann's music in Germany, in Berlin especially, was celebrated at that time. So,
have you ever done anything at the Oriental in Milwaukee?
I had played there. You know, they just lost their organ last year, and are having a new one installed. So I had played the old one.
Eventually, an organ can just be so what? What happens to an organ?
Well, I think it actually belonged to an individual, if I heard that story correctly. And he had loaned it or donated it to the theater, and the theater was going to be remodeled or something like that.
New seats and things were being.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember all the specifics, but he decided it was time. He wanted it back, and I don't know whether he's donating it to another theater, installing it in a home, or what have you. But that, or whether he was worried it would be damaged in the restoration of the theater. I'm not exactly sure of the story, but yeah, the organ was going to be lost. But the owners of the Oriental, in Milwaukee, wanted an organ and are having another instrument that they located installed. So that's exciting. But yeah, I did play at the Oriental before on the old Kimball that was there but that was, yeah, good number of years ago now. So.
I grew up in Milwaukee, and I left in 1962. And I came back, I don't know how many years later. I would come back every year or two just to come back to Milwaukee. But Milwaukee in a small doses is fine. It's a lifetime resident, I would say no. So I came back, and that very evening, the Oriental was reopening.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Closed down. I'm thinking the 70s that they were starting.
Okay.
And they played, they did a silent movie.
Okay. Okay.
I believe Greed.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
And that's the first time I saw a silent movie.
Okay.
With accompaniment live, and I was pretty impressed with it. And say, well, I lived in Milwaukee. I didn't appreciate how unique a theater like the Oriental was.
Yeah. Few people know too that the Riverside Theater, which is sort of the more famous theater in town, I think, has an original theater organ in it too. But there are so many touring productions that use that theater that the organ rarely gets played. But yeah, that's another gem instrument that Milwaukee has. So
I went. My first entertainment in the outside world was to see Song of the South at the Riverside.
Okay. Yeah.
1946, a few years ago. And I remember my mother taking me because it was a Disney movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's the big song from Song of the South? Where the
Zippity Doo-Dah, right?
Right.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful song. And I said I was humming that song, and but we had no music in our house, so I didn't know.
Okay.
Hear that song except on the radio, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we went to whatever theater had Disney movies. I went to the Town.
Yeah.
The Town was a more recent theater. It was built in the 50s.
Okay.
And there was another theater, the Alhambra, which is very near the Town, and they started tearing them down. Well, why would they tear them down? And
well, the great news for Milwaukee on the theater scene is that the Milwaukee Symphony is now restoring the Warner Theater. Yeah, which is great news. So
that's a great cinema to sit there. It's like gold. You go inside, and it seemingly is layered with gold. They have to have the Brinks people watching that nobody takes some of the gold out of the theater. But the backstage area is too small, so they need to go into the alley. Is that what they have to do?
Actually, you should check it out. There's a YouTube video. They had to elongate the theater to make space backstage, and they actually remove because it's historic. They have to follow all those guidelines. But there's a video. They sever the back wall from the building and move it back on these, I don't know, trucks or something for about 20 feet. It's amazing to watch. They do it in the time-lapse photography, so you could see, you could see it quickly. But it's amazing the amount of care that they did. But I'm really excited. I mean, I haven't lived in Milwaukee for more than 20 years either, but I'm eager to see that when it's done. That should really be something special. So,
is it close, do you think, to being done? So if we could get over the corona?
I think they were planning to actually open it this year or sometime, but I don't know what corona has done to that timeline. So, but no, that's a great positive step in the right direction. I think that's going to be really good for the city and for the symphony too. So.
Well, again, I thank you very much. It's been a very informative hour, and I hope that people will follow your career and buy.
Thank you.
Some of the
my pleasure. Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for thinking of doing this. This was really, all you do for Footlight and all of the things you make available to us is just a tremendous resource. And I think many of us take it for granted that if there's a cast album that we need to find, oh, well, you'll have it. And again, you proved that right. So keep doing what you're doing. There are a lot of us who really appreciate it. Probably don't say thank you enough. So
I don't necessarily have the very common stuff because most people go to Amazon if they're looking for original Oklahoma. They're not going to go to Footlight Records.
Right.
If they want the Chinese, the Tokyo recording.
Yeah.
That's where I come in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. And,
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I'll be talking to
Anytime.
you personally off and on in
It was
the
yeah.
future.
No, honor to be asked. I'm happy to do it anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.